The most violent eruption in recorded human history was an underwater volcano eruption. It was so big that it literally changed the landscape of our planet. And we're still feeling its effects today. It's the reason why some scientists think that one day something similar could wipe out all life on Earth. And it's probably responsible for a bunch of weird stuff you've heard about, like how there are giant holes in Antarctica that have never been explained. And it might even be to blame for your flat screen TV dying when you're watching a scary movie. But before we get into all that, let me explain what this eruption actually was. The year was 1815, and everything was basically normal. That is until April, when a series of earthquakes hit the island of Sumba in Indonesia. On April, people felt another really strong earthquake. They didn't know it at the time, but that day, the underwater volcano beneath them erupted. This wasn't like your typical volcanic eruption where hot lava came spewing out of the top. Instead, it was an explosive eruption, meaning that instead of lava, ash, rock, and gas shot up into the air. It turned out that this was the biggest underwater volcano eruption ever recorded in human history. And it was thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Now, you might be thinking that since this happened underwater, it wouldn't have affected us much, but you'd be wrong. You see, although the eruption happened underwater, it released so much energy that it blew the top off of the volcano and created a massive caldera or crater. The top of the volcano was over 600 meters deep, and the walls were over 300 meters high. What had once been a single island was now two separate islands. Then all the ash started falling down, and it fell on everything. Ships sailing through the area had to abandon their voyages because they couldn't see through all the ash. Some people on nearby islands went blind from staring into the ash cloud, and what eventually settled onto the ground looked like snow, but it was actually mostly made up of pulverized rock particles. Since the particles were so light, they were able to travel really far. Ash ended up covering thousands of square kilometers, including on the islands of Sumbawa and Flores. The ash even made it to Australia, over 3,000 kilometers away, and some accounts said that ash fell all the way in Japan. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Huge waves hundreds of meters tall crashed into the shores of the island. They destroyed entire villages and killed thousands of people. When all was said and done, at least 42,000 people were dead, many of them because of tsunamis that struck far away from the actual volcano. For example, the island of Java, which is the most populated island in Indonesia, was hit by a tsunami over 1,000 kilometers away from the volcano. In fact, the tsunami caused by this eruption was so big that it circled the entire globe 3 times. So you can imagine just how much water was displaced. It was so bad that scientists think that the eruption was responsible for changing the climate around the world for the next few years. After all, this was an eruption like no other before or since. How could this have happened? Let's start at the beginning. Deep under the ocean off the coast of the Sumatra island, there's a place called the Krakatoa, or sometimes Krakatoa volcanic arc. There are 7 volcanoes in this arc, and back in 1815, all 7 of them were connected to form one continuous landmass. But it was also an underwater volcano arc, which means that the volcanoes were formed by tectonic plates crashing into each other. This happens when 2 gigantic slabs of rock that make up the Earth's crust collide. One of them is called the Australian Plate, and the other is called the Pacific Plate. Every year, the Australian Plate moves about 7 centimeters closer to the Pacific Plate. Now, when they slam into each other, the Pacific Plate gets pushed underneath the Australian Plate and dives into the mantle, which is the layer of the Earth between the crust and the core. It's kind of like pushing one sheet of paper under another sheet of paper, but in this case, instead of paper, it's 2 gigantic slabs of rock moving at extremely slow speeds. As the Pacific Plate dives into the mantle, pressure and temperature increase dramatically. Eventually, the rock starts to melt and magma, which is molten rock, begins to fill up the gaps between the plates. This magma is less dense than the surrounding rock in the mantle, so it starts to float upwards. And when it reaches the crust, it creates volcanoes. The thing is, this process of creating volcanoes doesn't stop. New magma keeps coming up, and the volcanoes keep growing. And over millions of years, whole mountain chains can be formed this way, like the Rocky Mountains here on land. But sometimes the magma chambers under these volcano arcs fill up with so much magma that they overflow. That's what happened in 1815. The magma chamber under the Krakatoa volcanic arc was full to the brim. And when I mean brim, I mean bottom. It overflowed out of a weak point in the crust and sent 30 cubic kilometers of material erupting out of the volcano. To put that number in perspective, if you took every single person on Earth and laid them end to end, they would only take up 12 cubic kilometers of space. So, yeah, there was a lot of material that needed somewhere to go. And because the explosion was under the sea, the pressure from the eruption was able to push the material up and out in all directions. Underwater explosions are generally more violent than the same explosion on land, because there's so much water getting blasted away. Just think about the difference between popping a balloon with a pin on the ground and popping that same balloon underwater. Under the water, the balloon will explode outwards in all directions. That's what happened here. All the water got blasted away in all directions. Then all the water came rushing back in to fill the new caldera. But it didn't come in gently. It came in with a vengeance. It created a destructive wave that scientists believe reached heights of around 40 meters near the volcano, and then slowly dissipated as it traveled away. In terms of how powerful this eruption was, we can measure it using the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VE. The index is based on the volume of material ejected during an eruption along with the height of the eruption column. This eruption was a 6 out of 8 on the VE scale, the second highest possible rating. Only one other eruption in recorded human history has ever been a 6 out of 8, and that was the eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia 74,000 years ago. In fact, some scientists think that the Mount Toba eruption may have actually been responsible for wiping out all humans on the planet at the time, and that if something similar happened today, it could do the same. Here's what's crazy. Scientists think that the Krakatoa caldera is still at risk of producing another big eruption, the one in 1815. You see, the area is part of the Ring of Fire, which is a horseshoe-shaped belt around the basin of the Pacific Ocean where a lot of volcanoes and earthquakes happen. And as I mentioned earlier, the area is created by magma generated from two tectonic plates colliding. So at any point, the magma chamber could fill up again and spill over, potentially killing thousands upon thousands of people. That's why in 2018, authorities had to evacuate the island, because they were worried that a new eruption was imminent. You see, this isn't the first time that the Krakatoa volcano has blown up. It's been creating new islands and destroying old ones for hundreds of thousands of years. And there's evidence that the current island of Krakatoa is only the latest in a long line of Krakatoa islands. But it's not just dangerous for people. Animals living on or near the volcano are also at risk. Scientists have found fossils of mini marsupials in the layers of ash from the 1815 eruption. These are animals that would look like tiny kangaroos, only they lived and died during the time of the eruption. It was such a cataclysmic event that it wiped out almost every species on the island, giving scientists a window into the past and helping them learn more about evolution. What's more, researchers are even trying to use what happened here to understand other places around the world. See, after the eruption, a lot of the ash and rock landed in Antarctica. At first, scientists thought that maybe volcanic eruptions elsewhere were to blame. But when they started studying ice cores taken from Antarctica, they realized that this wasn't true. The 1815 eruption was so big that it left a layer of ash and ice cores from Antarctica over 10,000 kilometers away. And this is helpful because it gives scientists an extra tool to help them study past climate change. Basically, they can look at layers of ice from different years and find little bits of ash from different volcanic eruptions. Then they can use those to date other things they find in the ice, like bacteria or pollen or whatever. It helps them figure out how the climate is changing over time. There are also other places where scientists have used the ash from this eruption to help answer questions. For example, it's been used to date ancient Egyptian mummies. That's because the eruption happened during the year without a summer. Crops failed and people starved all over the world, even in Egypt. And the timing of this famine helped scientists better understand the timeline of ancient Egyptian history. Speaking of the year without a summer, the 1815 eruption was also blamed for strange occurrences like the unusual behavior of wild animals. When the ash filled the sky, birds flew erratically and fell from the sky. Fish swam up rivers and died on land. Cattle stampeded in terror, and dogs howled at the moon. People started to believe that the end of the world was at hand. Even Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, was inspired to write her famous book because of the gloom that filled the skies. In 1816, as far as total damage goes, the 1815 eruption was the most expensive natural disaster in recorded history. Back then, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, owned most of the land on Sumatra, and in modern currency, the company lost about $37 billion worth of buildings, infrastructure, and ships. But ultimately, it was the people who suffered the most. Thousands of lives were cut short, and survivors had to pick up the pieces and try to rebuild their lives. Luckily, we haven't had anything like this happen since, at least not that we know of. But there are plenty of places around the world where something similar could happen at any time. We can only hope that if it does, it won't be quite as destructive as the one that happened all those years ago in 1815. Hey there, thanks for watching another episode. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to stay tuned. And if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a patron. It's a great way to help us make the best videos we can, and it's a huge help. Until next time, this is your host signing off.